Māori, so kia ora ngā mihi nui ki koutou katoa. Greetings everybody and good health to all of you. It's a real privilege for me to be here today. I travelled 24 hours or so to reach Mexico City about now, and so if I make any mistakes or if I fall down on the floor, you'll know why, and just carry on and let me sleep and I'll wake up. But no, really, I'm very pleased to be here. My presentation will be a little bit different from Howard's, although you will see some of the same principles and ideas that he mentioned come through. Constantine asked me to do this presentation because we had our general election in September last year. And in some ways, I am the worst possible person to do a presentation because we lost our election very, very badly last September. But often there is as much to learn in a loss as there is in a victory. And hopefully I will be able to talk to you a little bit about that. I'm also conscious as I start that we had our colleague from India mention 1.3 billion people, and from the Philippines 100 million. Would anyone like to guess the population of New Zealand? 4 million, nearly 5 million. So the scale is significantly smaller, but again, I believe that the principles of campaigning remain similar for progressive parties all around the world, and hopefully we can learn lessons from one another, no matter how big or how small our countries are. So we did have our election last year. Moving into that election, the centre-right party, who are called the National Party in New Zealand, they were the incumbent government. They had won government in 2008, they had retained government in 2011, and then they won again in 2014. But they went into the election in New Zealand off the back of a relatively strong economy. So while the New Zealand economy was affected by the global financial crisis, our economy remained strong for two principal reasons. One is we are mostly an exporter of commodities. We export as a country primary produce, dairy, sheep meat and so on, and the prices for those commodities have been good. The other reason was because our banking system was somewhat insulated from what happened in the rest of the world. So the economy was strong. I have to say here that from a progressive point of view, while I would say the statistics and the indicators of the economy were strong, the reality for many people in New Zealand was not good. And inequality in New Zealand has grown over the term of this centre-right government. But in terms of the election campaign, our opponents were able to point to a very strong set of indicators for the economy. Perhaps not for the long term, but certainly for the short term. On the left of politics, and this is one of the main messages I want to talk about today, our biggest issue was our credibility on economic matters. What we lacked in the campaign and what we had lacked for the previous years was actually our version of the Malaysian dream that Howard talked about. What was our story of the economy and how the economy would benefit people in their daily lives? And what the centre-right of politics, or the right of politics, had been able to do was scare New Zealanders that our party and the parties of the left would make them less economically secure. And that to me is the message for centre-left political parties around the world. How do we project economic security? Because that's the message we had pushed against us. That if we do this, we'll cause, if we spend more programs in social areas, if we put more investment into here, that will make the overall economy less secure because we're taxing more and spending more. We needed to change that story, and as I'll say in a moment, I don't think we did that very well. The Prime Minister of New Zealand is a former Wall Street trader. So you would think that that would make him somebody that the public wouldn't trust. But he has done a very good job of building a story, a narrative about himself. He was brought up in relative poverty in New Zealand. His father died when he was very young, and he was brought up with his mother, and he did not have a lot of money. And his political party have spent a lot of time taking him back to the place where he grew up, so that he could say, look how well I have done. I went overseas, became a money trader, and I traded currencies all over the world. He leaves out the bit where he worked for the companies Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, and those that helped lead to the global financial crisis. That bit of the story is left out. And he has projected an image of, even though he is very, very wealthy, of being an ordinary person. One of us is the phrase that keeps being used, and that was a critical factor in our election. That shows I'm talking too long, doesn't it? Back one. So, and the other problem for us was that we had a lot of internal fighting within our party. We had 3 leaders in 3 years. That is never good for any campaign at any time. Afterwards, if any of you want to talk to me about why that happened, I can go into it. But suffice to say, if you have 3 leaders in 3 years, you aren't going to win many elections. In terms of New Zealand and our election, we operate an electoral system similar to the German proportional representation system. It's called MMP. Under that system, voters have 2 votes, 1 vote for the party that they want to support and 1 vote for their local district representative. That system means it is quite interesting to campaign under. The most important thing is the vote for the party. But sometimes that gets confused to being about the vote for the individual candidate. In terms of my own party, the Labour Party, at the election, 3 main issues caused us problems. The first was that lack of a policy coherence, that lack of a story about what will improve the lives for ordinary working people. We had very good individual policies. We had very good ideas on health, on education, on business development, on the environment, but they weren't part of a story that people could say, that is what will improve in my country, and that's what we got wrong there, I believe. We had very poor decision making within our party, leading to the 3 leaders in the 3 years, and that's obviously what went wrong there. The other thing, and it's the person who's on the picture there who I don't expect you to know, it's not me before I lost weight or anything like that. The man in the picture there is a German entrepreneur, and his name is Kim.com. And he came to New Zealand about 3 or 4 years ago, and to cut a long story short, he formed a political party called the Internet Party. And this political party had as its sole mission to unseat the right-wing government. Now, normally that would be very good for us, but what our opponents were able to exploit was that for us to win, we would have needed a coalition of ourselves, the Labour Party, the Green Party, a centrist party called New Zealand First, and also this gentleman here and his Internet Party. And the Prime Minister called this a 4-headed monster, and said that if you elect the left-wing parties, the progressive parties, it will be a 4-headed monster, and the Internet Party will have control. And he was a very strange man, as you can see from this picture. So the end result for us in the election was that we polled at 25%. That is the lowest that we have polled in the last 150 years. So it wasn't a good result for us. I want to talk about the things that were good from our campaign that we learned, and this will lead us to some of the things which I think are the principles that Howard talked about. We changed the way we talk to voters. We used to have a system of identifying voters we called red dot voters, the voters who have always voted for progressive parties and always will. We decided to focus on what we called purple dot parties, the people on just either side of us, those who have voted for us before but perhaps are now voting for green and environment parties, and those that had lost their confidence in us in terms of economic security. That's who we focused on. We used a series of predictive models that I'll talk about in a minute, and we used customised mail. We adopted a system out of the US Democratic Party that allows you to send very, very focused messages to individual voters about the issues that they care about. And I'll come to how we worked out what that was. But they were three significant changes which we actually think were useful. I won't bother too much with this except to say we significantly increased the number of individual contacts we made. In a country of 5 million, we made 375,000 individual contacts. That means one of us or our volunteers spoke directly to 375,000 voters, and if you multiply that out for much larger countries, you'll see that was quite an intensive process. How did we do it? That book up there is called The Victory Lab. It's an American book. It is a very good book if anyone wants to understand the ways of persuasion in campaigning. It's very American. It has things in it that would never work in the cultural context of New Zealand or indeed many other places. But the ideas in it, I think, are still fundamentally good. Essentially what that book says, and this is what Howard was talking about, if we want to succeed as progressive campaigners, we must be talking about the issues that matter to those individual people, communities that are affected. It's what the Americans call micro-targeting, being very specific about your messages directly impacting on a local community. The interesting thing about the Victory Lab is that for all of the talk of the internet, Facebook, social media, the conclusion remains that the best way to convince people to vote for you is to speak to them face to face, to have a conversation. And we believe that science is still correct, even if for us, for other reasons, the result didn't work out so well. Very briefly, the way that we were able to do that micro-targeting I mentioned is combining together the data that's available publicly, information about who is on the electoral roll, where they live, what kind of work they do, what kind of areas of the geographical areas that they live in. And then we combine that with our own data, which we had done by door knocking, by having conversations on the phone with people. We put that into our model, and out the other end of it came those very specific targets, the people who we needed to shift the vote for us and the issues that they cared about. We combined our own information about what we knew about them with what was available publicly, and that was how we did our targeting. This is just an example, and anyone from UC who's in the room, we've got the UC people here in the room today, and that's one of our members of Parliament, Jacinda Ardern, who is the former president of UC. This is an example of a piece of targeted mail. So our campaign had 3 phases. The first phase is identification of the voter. So that's the exercise I showed you before, where we actually find out who are the people who we believe we can persuade. The second phase of our campaign is the persuasion model. So that is a card that ended up in the letterbox of hundreds of thousands of people. It said very simply, talked about our core policies, talked about our other 2 votes. The people who received that received different messages in the shaded box that you see up there. So if we had identified that person as being interested in health or transport or education, they would get a specific message in that box about those issues. This is what we then call the mobilisation phase. So having gone through, identified the voters, attempted to persuade them, we then move into mobilisation. And you'll see the phrase at the top there, it says, on September 20, over 2 million people will vote. Will you? That's one of the pieces of science, encouraging people to vote on the basis that other people will do it. And everybody likes to do what other people are doing. And so therefore that message is important. And then having testimonials from individual people, real people talking about what concerned them. And I'll just show you on here. You'll see that, so as I mentioned, what we call the social proof headline, a survey sticker indicating that we would be asking people what they thought after the election, images of people, and then information about how people can vote. So those were the three phases using the science that we picked up. The questions that come out of that is that to make this work, you need a real culture change among volunteers to go out and have conversations with people to make sure that they actually understand the kind of campaigning we're doing. The thing that went mostly wrong for us in the campaign was that our base vote had eroded so much that going after people who were possible voters actually meant that a lot of our core voters weren't getting contact from us. We must build our economic credibility on the left. In New Zealand, we will never win an election when 80% of the voters don't think we have economic credibility, and that's the situation we found ourselves in at this election. The other point is cooperation among parties on the left, and this has been mentioned already today. That is critical to the future too. There is a strong green environmental movement in New Zealand that is on the left of politics. We have to both compete and cooperate with those other groups on the left to form a government, and we failed to do that in this last session. And so we move on. That's the new leader of the Labour Party, so we now have our fourth leader, but this one we are definitely going to be sticking with. We are assessing what worked and what didn't work in our campaign. We believe that there are better predictive tools out there for us. The core message for us is, and this really is picking up on Howard's point, we have to take politics out to the people in a way that they engage with. And the messaging that Howard showed, which was about the issues, not about the party as the first contact, that is the core lesson. Being able to relate to people in a way that is about their issues and then bringing them along with us to the party rather than dropping our party name on the top of absolutely everything. That would be critical to our success. And as I say, we have a new leader there as well. So my message is, in summary, losing the election in the way that we did has caused us to realise three critical things. We must build a story about the way the economy will benefit all people. That is the way we will bring people to progressive parties. We must develop our cooperation on the left, and we must ensure that we take the tools and the lessons of a loss and turn it into a victory. Thank you.